Anybody from Germany? Netherlands? How do you pronounce PHP in Dutch? PHP, right? So, yeah, this is very unfortunate. We made a lot of fun of PHP in Turkish, calling it PHP, because it sounds like a pronunciation of a political party name, and often people go like CHP zihniyeti, and we say PHP zihniyeti, and we made a lot of fun of it. But turns out that it's actually a legit pronunciation of PHP. In Germany as well, in German, people pronounce it as PHP. So I was shocked when I first saw that in Germany. Like, did anybody say sorry? Oh, yeah. But yeah, so that was fun. PHP zihniyeti. I wonder if anyone else will join us, or, well, some people are coming in. Hello. Hi. Welcome. Does anybody write JavaScript here? Raise your hands. Oh, everybody writes JavaScript. Whoa, interesting. Who has to write JavaScript? Okay. And who does it willingly? Willingly, yes. A couple. All right. Majority has to write JavaScript. Who dislikes the current frameworks that we have? React, Angular, and that hype? You don't like them? Okay. Yeah. All right. Exactly. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. The problem with JavaScript. Why people felt the need for those frameworks. Why we don't like them. And if we are right or wrong in not liking them. And maybe we can wait a couple of more minutes. Are there anybody outside? Like in the area? Thanks. Ooh. We're taking off. So are there actually people out? Okay, yeah, I would guess. It's the end of the day, so thanks for still being with us today. I know you might have been tired by the countless talks. Hello. But I will try to speak about hard subjects. I hope it will be easy to listen and you'll enjoy it. But maybe we can start. Can we start? Right? Okay. Hello. Yeah, some people are coming in, but you know, the first couple of minutes are always boring, mandatory stuff. And this time, obviously, it's also about me. I'm Armağan Amcalar. I currently live in Berlin, Germany, but obviously I'm from Turkey, Istanbul. I'm currently working at a company called Wayfair as a senior engineering manager. And before that, I was doing startups for like, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years. And for the past 10 years, I've been building and leading teams of certain sizes. And I wrote a lot of code. I started really early in late 90s. Actually, I have a couple of colleagues here from 20 years ago. Hello. And nowadays, I mostly write open source code. I have about 60 open source projects that I wrote on GitHub, that they're mostly JavaScript, like 90% JavaScript, or maybe 95. And I do stuff that range from brain signal processing to audio tools and libraries, to front-end libraries, to back-end libraries, to microservices libraries with JavaScript. So if you like taking a look at open source JavaScript code, you can do that. I also lead a volunteer organization called Lonja, that is a software craftsmanship school for women, because there's a huge gender gap in the industry, and we have to do whatever we can, whatever is in our power to close that. I hope to see one day a true representation of all genders here in this room, and not mostly men. And yeah, I also do a couple of conference talks here and there. And I like to talk about microservices originally, or cultural things. And this is one of the first ranting talks that I have. I'm going to rant a lot about JavaScript, why we hate it. I mean, we kind of a love and hate relationship with it, right? Now that we are a couple of more people, I can ask a similar question. Who has to write JavaScript? Please raise your hands if you have to write it. Okay. Raise your hands if you willingly write JavaScript. That because you like it. All right. A lot of people, yeah, see, like, same people raising their hands for both writing it because they're forced to, and because also they like it. We have a love and hate relationship with it. And basically, if you think something is wrong with JavaScript or the people who use JavaScript, you're not alone and you're not wrong. And it's perfectly fine to feel that way. Although, with the current change of the industry and the tide, some people or some communities make us think that we are inferior and we don't understand front-end and we don't understand JavaScript. That's not the case. There are certain number of parts that are wrong with it, and I'll try to cover them and provide some insights for your understanding for why it's useful or why it could be useful and is underutilized. So I'm not going to give you a lecture. I'm not going to sell you anything. It's just a rant and some insights about JavaScript, what I have seen in the past 20 years. So I'm going to start with a little of history for some context. Anybody who wrote JavaScript in the 1990s? Well, quite a number of people. So, hi. That's kind of old. We're in this for like 20 years. So, JavaScript is invented in 1995, right? And it was a front-end language for introducing some dynamic programming to the static web pages. And by the end of the year, in 1995, actually Netscape, the company who invented JavaScript, decided to offer it as a server-side solution, much like Node.js is today. So JavaScript was one of the first server-side web languages, alongside Java and others, of course, in the space in 1995. That's pretty old. Please look at this piece of code and tell me if it looks familiar to you. Well, what we can see here is we have, this is an HTML structure, and we have a special tag called server, and in it goes some server-side code. This is how people did server-side JavaScript as part of Netscape's enterprise server offering in 1995, and pretty much through the next 15 years. Can anybody tell me what it looks like? Does it look like a modern language that we use nowadays? What does it look like? Yeah, it looks like PHP, right? Instead of the server tag, you would have the PHP open tag and so on and so forth. It's pretty much the same thing. And I mean, PHP 4 or something, as we would do, because nobody nowadays does inline PHP anymore, I guess. But pretty much the same thing is you have a write function to write something to the DOM, to the HTML, and you can put whatever you want. Obviously, there's no CSS back then, literally, and all styling goes into tags and their attributes. So, I mean, this is where we were, right, 25 years ago. And we're still struggling with it. This is what JavaScript was back then. So the first generation of JavaScript developers came up with a concept called DHTML, dynamic HTML. And they were building pretty much menus that open when you hover on them, or sliding text, and all sorts of crazy things that we sometimes do with GIFs today, or images. We were doing with JavaScript back then. It was meant for some designers to introduce some animations and activity and dynamic behavior onto their web pages. And this was the first generation of JavaScript developers. They were mostly designers, or also some backend people as well, who were, getting used to this dynamic content generation and web pages. It was totally different, but the way we wrote it, you saw here the tags. Some of the tags are in caps, like font color. All of the variable names were in caps back then in JavaScript. That was a convention. But your typical JavaScript file would be like 100 lines most, and that would basically get you through with some DHTML effects. Then we had the browser wars, and they were very innocent. When Internet Explorer fought against Firefox, or both ways, they were very innocent. If you compare them to the wars that we have right now, the war from React against Angular, and server-side rendering, and all of those things that force you to learn a new thing every week almost. And we just had two browsers that had some differences in their APIs, mostly differences in their rendering, and that's, I made a joke on Twitter about this. That's why I lost my hair, trying to figure out the differences between rendering engines. But yeah, around 2005 and 2006, we felt like, okay, this DHTML thing is good, but it's not getting us anywhere. We need applications that are running on the front end. And that's when Prototype.js came out, then Scriptaculous, then jQuery. And they were kind of unifying the way that you interact with the browser with certain differences. And they allowed you to build more realistic applications in JavaScript. Now, frankly, JavaScript didn't really change that much since the very beginning. It's pretty much the same language. And whatever you can do right now, you could do back then, like 20 years ago. But we didn't know. Nobody explored it. We just didn't know what it could do. After this time, in 2008, Google came on board with Chrome. So today, some of these tools are like, we feel like they were here since the beginning of time, but Chrome actually came about 10 years ago. Before that, there were no Chrome. And Google changed everything, because it was the first time a company came into the space to own the users. Remember, with Google, you are the product. Google is selling you. Google is selling us and our data. And they're offering free services, gathering our data and selling it to advertisers and make profit from that. It's a good business model. There's nothing inherently terrible about it, now that billions of people are on board. But the idea is Google Chrome obviously didn't have any users, and it would give Google a huge leverage if it could have users. So what they did was they used it for, they used their engineering power for marketing purposes. They put armies of developers behind Chrome, partnering with Apple and using Apple's rendering engine that was open source, that was called WebKit. They started building their own browser, and inch by inch, now I guess they're the most used browser nowadays. Even so that Internet Explorer started using Chrome's rendering engine, Blink, on its own. So they kind of ate Internet Explorer as well. So the idea is Google was the first company to do this, but they were very smart. They were like, if I own this developer space, I will pretty much be able to dictate anything I want, and it will make money for me. And obviously, they contributed to a lot of standards, because before Google came on board, all we had was browser wars, because Microsoft was selling its product Internet Explorer. Mozilla or Netscape was selling it as a part of a suite. So the browsers were the product. Google came and said, I don't want any money from the browser, but I want users to have a good experience on my platform. And they drove the standards. And as users, we benefited a lot from that. They came up with V8, which is the fastest JavaScript engine that is currently on the market. And that was actually great. And does anybody know Nokia and Motorola cell phones? Yeah, most of us know, right? Yeah. So Chrome is to Internet Explorer and Firefox what Apple was to Nokia and Motorola. Before Apple came up with this concept of the iPhone, the mobile phones were like very dummy, no innovation at all, just the same models with minimal changes year over year. And then Apple said, okay, I'm going to build a computer, put it in a form of a phone, and this is what you're going to use. And that's pretty much what Chrome did, or what Google did with Chrome. They basically blew the competition out of the market because they had superior engineering power, and they used it for coming up with the best user experience, which means faster rendering engines and more web APIs. In the end, it worked for us, like for the users. But those were hard times. Actually, here's the question: can you actually imagine a world without GitHub or Stack Overflow? Yes? No? Well, we can. It was very hard. Basically, they also came out 10 years ago. Before that, there was no Stack Overflow. If you had a question, you were asking friends or mail lists. And sometimes it took weeks to get an answer. There were no open source. There were other projects like GitHub that hosted some repositories, open source repositories, but collaboration wasn't a thing. And we didn't know what it actually would mean. And these were really hard times when individuals contributed libraries and frameworks. Then around 2010, Backbone came on as mostly an individual effort. Then Angular came to the scene, and that was sponsored by Google. Now, this was the second wave of attack from Google to own the developer space. And they basically said, we're going to give you the framework that you're going to use to build applications. It's so easy. It's super easy. And you're going to play by our rules. It was supposedly open source. You can see the code, definitely. And it's for free. But that doesn't mean it's open source. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But with Backbone and Angular came the third generation of JavaScript developers. Now, this is very important. There are three generations. One, the initial generation. The second one is the jQuery generation. And the third one is Angular, Backbone, modern MVC framework generation. And people who lived through all of these had to shift their mindsets to adapt to these generations. But with every generation came millions of new developers. So the problem was, back then, in 2010, nobody understood what MVC was. We had some examples from Ruby on Rails and PHP, like Zend. And it was actually a very popular thing to duplicate Zend in JavaScript as an MVC framework. But MVC is a concept for UI, user interface building, and Zend, unfortunately, doesn't really or cannot possibly represent true MVC in its graphical context sense. So what we did was we copied some broken copies of MVC and tried to make frameworks out of it. It didn't really work. And then, people saw what Google was doing, and then they jumped on board. Microsoft came on board, and Facebook also came on board. They open sourced their own libraries. Microsoft actually contributed to Angular in a sense that they released a new version of Angular together with Google, Angular 2. And for that, they said, this language isn't enough. We cannot do whatever we want with this language, and we're going to create a new language for it. And they wanted to call it AngularScript or something. No, before TypeScript. Yeah, I guess something like that. And then, the community was like, no, wait, we don't want another language. And then they settled on TypeScript. And now if you want to do Angular applications, the best way to do it is to use TypeScript, again, which is another language. Why? What is wrong with the language? And the problem is there's nothing wrong with the language. But these are methodologies to lock you in. This is vendor lock-in. You have to use these tools from these companies, and you're limited by their features. I'm going to speak more about open source, but you cannot really change React or any of the other frameworks to your own liking. It's impossible to get into the code. It's so big, so large, and hard to understand. You have to study it in order to be able to add your own functionality on top of it. And sometimes you're not allowed to. Sometimes these companies have committees that will reject your contributions. But yeah, so Facebook also was on board, and they said, here's React, please take it. It's an internal framework that we're doing, and we are open sourcing it. And that is a great marketing move as well. And they said, we are introducing a concept called virtual DOM that is faster than the DOM, because DOM operations are costly. Now, did anybody hear about this, that virtual DOM is fast? Raise your hands if you heard virtual DOM is fast. Yeah, pretty much everybody, right? This is marketing. This is what you see in TV advertisements when they're trying to sell you the same soap with different, different fragrances and charge you extra for it. Obviously, that's not the case, because in the end, you're doing DOM operations. Nothing can be faster than the DOM itself if you're working with the DOM in JavaScript. And in fact, virtual DOM is a pretty bad idea, because it does a lot of calculations. And Facebook's claim was that those calculations are cheap. Yeah, when you're doing a Hello World application or a to-do application, they're cheap. When you're doing a real application with, thousands of components, they're not really cheap. That's why some editors based on JavaScript, and I'm talking about Visual Studio Code, rewrote their rendering engine from React to native DOM because it didn't work. It wasn't fast enough. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about this virtual DOM thing. And I spent a considerable amount of time, days and weeks and months, trying to convince my fellow developers that virtual DOM can never be faster than the actual DOM, because first, you still have those DOM operations, plus you have all the calculations around it to figure out the diff and what applications, what operations you're going to apply. So, it wasn't actually very good, the conversations. Nobody believed me, because if Facebook is doing it, that's a company we know and love and use. Everybody has a Facebook account. They have a lot of engineers. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's actually true, and you know nothing. But fortunately, time has proved the concept that it's actually very slow. So the other thing is they came up with this idea of components. Welcome to UI development. That's something we actually figured out in 1970s. A component-based design, and we've been using it in backend languages for many years, right? And they said, we're going to do everything with components. So even if you are fetching data from the backend, it has to be a component. It has to be a UI component in React. And it also doesn't work. It also was a premature idea of software design. So I'm telling all of these, if you ever felt the same, hey, this idea doesn't seem right, I think you'll understand, and that's actually why I'm sharing these ideas. But then, a couple of years ago, there is a new framework on the market that's called Svelte. Does anybody know Svelte? Raise your hands. A couple of people do. That's great. It's very, very new, and not a lot of people use it. It's not backed by any corporation. This is the biggest problem of our generation right now. Big corporations like Google, Microsoft, or Facebook are changing or defining how we write code, and not the communities. And Svelte is kind of a movement against it, which argues a lot against React and the pain points of current modern front-end engineering. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Svelte again in a couple of minutes. But the thing is, this hype never ends. Every couple of months, there's a new framework, something to learn. There are, I don't know, these tools, Babel, Webpack, CoffeeScript. Does anybody remember CoffeeScript? Yeah, that was a thing, right? Does anybody write CoffeeScript right now? No. You do? OK, nobody writes CoffeeScript. It just died. Why was the thing? What was wrong with JavaScript? Was anything wrong with JavaScript that much to warrant a new language that you had to compile to JavaScript? No, obviously not. Then we had Gulp and Grunt. We also don't use them right now. There's Webpack, which reinvented itself because it got backed by huge corporations. That's why it could do it. And Grunt and Gulp couldn't, because they were actual true community efforts. There's Sass and TypeScript. Most of the people think you have to use TypeScript in order to do good applications that are statically typed, that are enterprise scale in JavaScript. But that's also not the case. It's not a good idea. There were, Ember, Flow, Redux, server-side rendering, a lot of these technologies. And these are mostly hype-driven. But let's now talk about what the actual real problem is. The problem is hopefully visible in this graph that I drew for you. So we have two axes here. One is knowledge, the y-axis, and the x is seniority. So first you're a junior engineer, then you're a mid-level engineer, then you're a senior engineer. And the orange line is what I think I know, and the green line is what I actually know. So at the beginning of your career, you're pretty much zero, but once you learn a little bit of programming, you're like, oh, I know a lot, I know everything, and I can do everything. I know Kung Fu, right? And then you become a mid-level developer, and you're like, oh yes, I'm at the height of my career, give me frameworks, I can invent frameworks. I know everything better than you, and that's why I'm going to invent my own thing. And as you become more senior, this illusion goes away, and you're like, oh, there's so much to know. I don't really know enough, and there's a lot to learn. But this is actually the problem. The problem is most people quit programming when they really become senior engineers. They are moved to more managerial roles. They are moved to more architectural roles. And they're not, in a way to define the industry. And unfortunately, these generational gaps are so close that if you're a mid-level, at the end of your mid-level career in one generation, and if you want to move on to the next as a programmer, obviously you fall back to your junior years again. So we cannot actually build up enough expertise in this area. And all the efforts that we're currently doing, the modern frameworks that we're using, are built by people who are either early in their mid-level careers or mid-level careers. And unfortunately, not senior people. And this is the problem. The next problem is with the generation. Did you ever hear about the term Generation Y? Raise your hands if you heard Generation Y. Okay, so it is the generation that is born after 1980 to 1990, sort of. And this is pretty much everybody who is in this room or who is defining the industry. And there are certain characteristics of this generation that I'm not going to talk much about today. But I'm also a member of this generation, but we have a problem with attention. Our attention span is very, very low compared to previous generations. We have a problem with dedication. We cannot dedicate ourselves to one single thing. And we have a problem with effort. We don't want to spend a lot of effort doing something. We just want to be rich in the quickest way possible. And also, we have a problem with ownership. We want to own things. We don't want to use anyone else's framework, unless it's from Facebook, apparently. But we're like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I know better than you, so I want to own this thing. So let me use whatever I want. This is how it manifests itself. So what happens is you see some blog posts, you think it's cool, and you kind of dictate to use it in your office, and your leads who are now senior who stopped programming have to comply to keep you in the job. Otherwise, you're going to leave. Because the next startup, which is probably going to fail, will offer you that position with that language or the framework that you want to use. Because of all of these reasons, technological choices are actually driven by lust instead of reasonable criteria, selection criteria, and I'm going to talk about those as well. Now let's talk about the curse of JavaScript. And this is one of the saddest parts, because the barrier to entry for JavaScript is actually very low. It doesn't really have many concepts that you have to learn, doesn't really have many tricks that you have to learn. It's very straightforward. So pretty much everybody can learn it. And if you ever heard of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, a lot of people, when they study JavaScript for like, I don't know, a month or something, will come and say, oh, I know everything about JavaScript, and I can do anything in it. Obviously, that's not the case, but that's what their confidence gives you, mostly men. And the thing is, you can do anything in JavaScript. Now, in one of the previous talks, the speaker said, and that's a very famous quote, anything that can be written in JavaScript will be written in JavaScript. I'm doing machine learning with JavaScript. I'm taking your brain signals in real time and converting them to actual sentences, texts that you want to type with your brain signals. That is doable. You can fly robots, and you can build embedded circuits and embedded applications with JavaScript. All of these works. Why are we struggling with UI development? You know, if you can use a tool to build all of these awesome things, why are you still struggling with choosing a framework? This is the curse, because the barrier to entry is very low. Everybody can post anything to Medium or on GitHub, which is otherwise an awesome tool. But if you build a hype behind it, especially when you put a lot of corporate money to sponsor your developers to go to conferences and talk about the coolest library that your company built, the picture is a lot different. And you know, obviously, it also runs even in your fridge nowadays. It can run JavaScript. You can do mobile applications with it. There is this concept of React Native that compiles to actual real native iOS or Android code. And I think by now we can fairly say JavaScript is a meta language. That means it can do whatever you want, compile to whatever you want. In the end, it's compiling to C, and people ported Windows 95 to JavaScript. Windows 95, that operating system, works as a JavaScript application. So I also want to mention something called Sweet.js. This was a project from Mozilla, like 10 years ago, I guess. It was the best effort and the best thing to come for JavaScript, but it wasn't cool. It was a way to build additional language features into JavaScript, much like Lisp family of languages, because you could do macros very easily that looked like native syntax. But nobody liked it, and Mozilla wasn't cool back then. Firefox wasn't cool back then, so it didn't catch on. But actually, it was the best thing ever to happen to JavaScript. So it deserves an honorable mention. The thing is, instead of going forward and progressing and learning from our past mistakes, we're running in circles. We're inventing the same things, same technologies, and the wheel again and again. And one of them is server-side rendering. Does anybody do server-side rendering right now? as in the modern term, only a little people. That's pretty much what we did with PHP 10 years ago. Everything was server-side rendered. We had our data, we had our models, we rendered HTML and sent it to the browser, and that was it. That was server-side rendering. And then it was so heavy, the load was so heavy on our servers, and the user experience was so low because it took a lot of time to download all of those HTMLs, which would otherwise be a for loop of some divs or whatever. We invented something called single-page applications. And all of these frameworks came about that. And you know, server-side rendering was something we tried that didn't work. That's why we invented a new technology. Now what we're doing is going back to server-side rendering again with all of these frameworks, offering solutions for this. And again, in advertisements, you're going to hear, oh, server-side rendering is actually faster. Twitter started using server-side rendering and optimized their time to first tweet, whatever, by X seconds or milliseconds, whatever. And obviously, that is also not true. This is a very unpopular opinion, I'm going to tell you right now. Server-side rendering has to render the whole application on the server side first, then has to send all of those bytes, think of tweets, which has a lot of HTML around them, to the front end, and also all the front end application that needs to re-render that page in front end as well. So at least if you did single page applications, you didn't have to render anything on the back end, and whatever you shipped to front end was actually very, very little of amount of bytes only for the JavaScript application. So much like Virtual DOM, it is taking the existing technology of single page applications and adding on top. How can it be faster? It can't. What is slow is your JavaScript applications and the bloated libraries that these companies came up with. So again, we mentioned about the problem, but what is the actual underlying problem? The actual underlying problem is generations change, and unfortunately, the new generations don't really study the past. They don't know the history of computing, the history of UI applications, and whatever other companies or individuals did in this period, like in the last 10 years, what other technologies came onto market. The average experience of these library developers is around 3 to 5 years. They weren't doing programming back then. They weren't doing programming when people were using jQuery. So they don't know. So yet, of course, they're like, oh, we know better. We definitely know better. All right, so then what is the solution? Does anybody have any idea? Please raise your hands. Please. Sorry? Communism. Maybe, if this were an economic forum. Yes, please.
Like PHP back with HTML, like we did earlier.
Yes, that's actually a very good point and maybe a solution. Please, and you also... Yeah, go back. Okay, but we don't want to go back. We are humans. We want to always move forward and advance, right, and develop. So the solution is pretty simple. Follow scientific methodology. It's as simple as that. Science is doing this for thousands of years, and it is actually a very good way to learn from the past and reuse information from the past. What they do is scientists don't believe. They don't follow the hype. They do experiments, and they work with truth, data that is falsifiable. You run an experiment, you see that those numbers add up, and then you start doing it. And there's a very famous quote from, I guess, Isaac Newton that says, "Rise on the shoulders of giants," because that's what he did. He reused all of the research before him to make his studies, and yet we're not doing it. That is why we're running in circles and still suffering and not learning from the mistakes of the past. So now a little guideline about how to choose a technology and how to choose a framework. There's a concept called signal-to-noise ratio, and I'm going to talk about this in the next slide. It will be visually clear to you. But you should look at the amount of boilerplate that you're writing, that you have to write in order to get a certain sense of functionality, get a certain functionality done. And you should look at the code and see if you like it or not. I'm serious. The intuitiveness of an approach is the best criteria for you. If it's intuitive, if you feel like, yeah, this is something I can work with, and this is something I like to work with, then you should pick that technology. But more importantly, you should try to understand its source code. Can you really understand the source code? That is the meaning of open source. It's not that I'm sharing my code with you, but it's out in the open for everybody to read and understand and change. Because that's also a big part of our open source culture that is outside of these frameworks that are owned by the corporates. When you see a nice NPM library or a PHP library, you can fork it and change its code, right? You can add new functionality to it if it's almost what you want. But we cannot do this with these current frameworks, and that's a big problem. That's why you shouldn't use them. Have you seen any forks of React with some edit functionality for personal use? People would stone you to death because the original code changes so much and has so many breaking changes. You're going to be basically out of luck. Okay, here's the most prominent slide. So this is the same functionality implemented in React, Vue.js, and Svelte. Now, what it's trying to do is there are two inputs with two variables, and we're changing them, and we want to update the data with it. And you know, we're going to show the basically the sum of these two numbers. And in React, you basically right now have to use hooks, which is the new hype way of doing state management. And for every single variable, you have to write that use state line and then set A and set B to change them. And you have your event handlers, and this is how you bind them in the end. Vue.js is a little bit more simpler than React in terms of number of characters that you have to type, because you just export a default object. Why do you do that? Who knows? That has a data of type function. Functions are actions. They do stuff. Data on its own cannot be a function. But anyway, I'm saying this because it's not intuitive. And then you return an object that is your actual data. And here's what you type in Svelte to get the same functionality. Now, which one is the most intuitive? Which one seems the most friendly to you? One, React, raise your hands. No. Vue.js, anybody? A couple of people. Svelte? Yeah, pretty much everybody. This is not a marketing talk for Svelte at all. I haven't used it. I just looked at it. But when I look at it, I see that it satisfies a lot of the concepts. And its source code, I also looked into the source code, obviously. And the code that it generates is actually very beautiful. It doesn't use Virtual DOM because Virtual DOM is slow. It compiles this source code on the right to native JavaScript DOM operations instead of another middle layer like Virtual DOM, because you can do that, because that's possible. And I also spent a lot of heated time in terms of arguments to claim that this would be doable a couple of years ago, and again, nobody believed me. If any of the Turkish crowd here followed that heated debate on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, I was like named as the madman of the town or something. I don't know what it's in English. Köyün delisi. Because nobody believed this could be doable. But it is, and other people did it. It's called Svelte. It's a library out there that you can use now. You don't need Virtual DOM to be fast. This is the fastest that you can get and still look nicer. You don't need all of those junk code like those functions and that on change. You don't need any of those. Just have this, change your variables, it's going to work. If you have a function that updates those variables, it's going to work. And the idea is JavaScript can do anything. It can also be compiled to anything, right? We can compile it to, or we can compile C++ to JavaScript. Why cannot we compile this thing on the right to JavaScript? that would run in a browser? Of course we can, and that's what these people did. So in the most performant way, although there could be some improvements. So I guess there will be one more generation of front-end frameworks after Svelte. This is going to be kind of the 4th generation, and I guess there's going to be a 5th generation as well, where they will understand that, well, in fact, we can really simplify this and still be very performant by using native APIs of the platform, by just compiling stuff. And the thing is, the number of questions and answers on Stack Overflow is not a good indicator of success of a framework. In fact, it's the opposite. If there are like millions of questions about a framework in Stack Overflow, it tells me that it's a very badly written framework, that nobody understands it. Everybody have questions on how to do the simplest things. That's not a good tool. That's not an intuitive tool. An intuitive tool is something that you can use right away, that you can even guess what it would do just by looking at the names of functions and variables. Also, number of issues on GitHub isn't really a good metric, because it means, yes, it gets a lot of attention, but it also gets a lot of problems, that either people want more functionality, change functionality, or there are bugs. Even though the company behind the framework might be putting like 100 engineers on that to solve all of your problems, it still means that there's a huge problem with that framework. And do you really want to do that? That is the question. You don't want a technology where for every single trivial thing you have to Google. We like static things that don't change as humans. We don't like change. So we want to have a set of knowledge, and to be able to apply it to build further applications. And the question is basically, why are you programming? Why are you even programming? What is the goal of programming? Well, obviously we have a lot of fun doing it. That's why we're doing it, otherwise we wouldn't do it. But the thing is, you're programming to create value. Only that. It doesn't matter if it's for you or for your company, you're programming to create some sort of value. It could be economic value, it could be, I don't know, for a love affair. But the only metric that you should care about in terms of programming is productivity. Are you productive enough with the tool set that you have? And what is actually productivity? That's an open question that you can think about. But it goes like developer happiness. It is definitely sustainability. On the long run, your output shouldn't drop. And it's basically the rate of quality output that you have. And so I'm going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. But I'm going to say that being uncool is actually really cool. And I recommend you doing it. You don't have to follow the hype. You don't have to like it. And the best thing that you can do is to use and apply the scientific methodology to whatever you're doing in your daily job and efforts, and see if the tools that you're using actually pass the test of scientific methodology. And it doesn't matter if you're uncool. I'm pretty uncool in terms of my ideas about JavaScript, because I think most JavaScript developers' efforts are wasted because of these tools that you have to learn and relearn every single time. But it's fine. So I hope I didn't bore you. This is pretty much the end of my talk. I hope I could at least spark some interest in you about why we hate JavaScript and how we could not hate it and keep our sanity. But I hope you saw my Twitter handle in the down right. And here are the ways to contact me. I'd be very happy if we continued the discussion here and also on Twitter, because this is really eating and destroying our industry. This is destroying people's lives. We are wasting effort, energy, time, and money on things that don't matter at all, that will be rewritten and changed. You know, some old technology that nobody is going to remember, but people are forced to use those by some others who think hype is cool. So thank you for listening to me and for coming to the conference today. Thanks. I don't know if we have time for questions. Okay. Does anybody have any question? Yeah, please. Oh, here you go.
I think it's my like 9th year in the profession, but I'm coding since 1997. So right now I feel like I know nothing.
Yeah.
You know. So I agree with that. But I have this really burning question inside myself. I agree with everything, and everything in your slides are true, and I like always think the same. And it really gave me spark about the scientific methodology, and also answered some answers I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But like I really agree all the concerns in this deck and in your slide in your presentation. But I have this burning question. Like in every job I work, when I raise those concerns, I get fired. You know, like
Yes.
almost like I raise it and like 30 days, 35 days, and they say, yeah, here's your bonus, goodbye. So like, I don't know, like sometimes it's very hard to convey those ideas and like tell people.
It is.
Like, yeah, look, it's no-brainer. This is the thing. But like people say, oh yeah, okay, you say the shadow DOM, like virtual DOM is fast, but how can you say this? It's said by Facebook. It's a corporate. You are only a developer, and there's this big corporations with billions of profit. Yeah. So, what's the solution? You know, like that's my question, burning question. Not get fired and keep these ideas.
Yeah, the easiest solution is just to understand that this is not going to change, and you have to live with those people, or you have to leave. And the hard question is actually showing them that is the case. I spent countless nights awake just to prove some of these ideas, because I also have a couple of frameworks, right? I have 3 UI frameworks, 3 separate MVC frameworks that some of my companies used because I forced them to use it. But the idea is I did a lot of benchmarks and had to show how React is 10 times slower because it's going through all of those iterations and stuff, and give people lectures about this. And it really helps if you are in a leading position. It's a lot easier if you are a team lead or a CTO or a head of something. But if you're not, welcome to the club. I think the best thing we can do is to form a community on Twitter of anti-cool people and write about these things and create awareness. This is actually this is something I didn't include in my slides because I don't like the connotations of those terms, but there's awareness and mindfulness. That is a rage right now in personal growth and personal development. If you take the concepts, they actually apply to programming as well. You have to be mindful and aware of what that thing is doing. It's not magic. It's written by people like you and me. And if you're aware that that could be problematic, then you can solve it. Otherwise, you're just going to fall in line and follow the herd. But it doesn't help. So it's really tough. I agree. Thanks. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Here.
Hello.
Hi.
Svelte is a good thing and beautiful thing, but it's not very new. As I know, it had some predecessor called Reactive.js from the same author, but became not so popular.
Yeah.
So how do you think, is there a chance that big companies like Facebook and Google will finally use something like Svelte as one unified language for all, like IoT or something like that?
Did you mean like specifically Svelte or JavaScript in general?
I mean, I had some experience 2-3 years ago, and there was some reactive JS from the same author, and this author left this project reactive JS, and then he had also some bubble or some product like that, But the Svelte is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And this is a new concept of thinking, and
Yes.
so shall the new big companies like monsters, like I mean, shall it be the unified language somewhere? How do you think?
So
Thank you.
I think corporations want to make money, and that's their only goal. They don't want to serve the communities or anything if it doesn't make them earn money, if it doesn't give them money. So that's why these efforts like Svelte are very unpopular, and that's why some of them die, like Sweet.js, which was, again, like the best thing to happen to JavaScript. But some of these companies actually destroy these technologies. Angular was very good on its own before Google hired the person who wrote Angular. Angular was a community effort and an open source effort originally, but then Google hired the engineer because they liked it and they wanted to, have that. And please.
A man told me once that they use elephants to transport matches.
Transport matches?
Yes, the big companies use elephants to transport matches.
Yeah. So I don't know. What I actually know is we have to be really aware of what these companies are trying to do, and that is actually also why Apple created Swift. Apple had the perfect chance to use JavaScript for iOS development when they decided to switch from Objective-C, but they didn't do it for a number of reasons, and those reasons don't really have much to do with engineering, unfortunately. Because Apple already had all the UIKit framework, the framework that they use for their mobile applications, translated into JavaScript. They had to do that for the first year, but then they dropped it. They invented Swift and ran with that. And people had to learn Swift in order to be able to work with Apple. And now it's on its 5th generation. And they had, I guess, more than 10 breaking versions until they got to Swift 5. It breaks every 6 months. And this is not productive at all. This just, but it brings a lot of money to Apple. And they're not going to stop doing this.
Because according to history, all technology passes through complexity and comes to simplicity finally.
Yes.
And maybe it's time for developers to dictate big monsters what to do.
That is true, but also we are human and we have egos. And if you are a chief architect at Apple, and if they come to you and say, hey, we're going to change Objective-C, what do you want to do? You say, I want to create my own language. Much like Rob Pike did with Go. Did the world need Go? I don't think so. We didn't. But Rob Pike invented it, and this is his quote. He said he invented it because new hires joining Google wasn't really good at C and Java. It was hard for them to understand. So we invented a simpler language for them to be able to be productive and do their jobs. Now, who cares if they go to another company and their knowledge or experience is worthless again? And that's why they keep saying that Go is a good systems language. It's actually a very good backend language. Yeah, it's a language, but it's not really that shiny thing. It's because Google wanted to make more money off of their first hires. It's why we have Go. And it's why, also Rob Pike wanted to create a language. This is as simple as this. And this is not going to go away. We have to understand that as individual developers, we are unfortunately some pawns at the hands of big giants. And we do whatever they want us to do. That's why I tend to stay away from corporate-backed languages and environments. That's why I like JavaScript, because it's kind of a standard that works everywhere. And that's also why I did a lot of PHP, and I'm still doing PHP, because it has the meaning of being open. Although there are some companies that are trying to change it or affect it or force it in certain directions, it's still, we are still kind of a community. So yeah, the corporations won't stop. They just want more money, and they're going to do whatever brings them more money, who cares? And Google actually has the power to invest in Go's marketing, and it sends its developers around the world to talk about Go and how cool it is, and that's how it's gaining popularity. So, you know, this is pretty much creating, owning industries and disrupting industries, existing industries and markets. They're just applying it to programming, and that's what it is. Thanks. Thanks. I guess there's one more. Anybody, obviously you can leave, you don't have to stay. I have a lot of time, and as long as the organizers don't kick me out, I love to have these type of discussions. Please.
Yeah, I want to rebound on this Go thing you just said. By talking about Rust and the upcoming of WebAssembly to the web, don't you think that this is some kind of progress?
It is. I actually love WebAssembly because that means now it's more accessible to a wider range of developers. And that also means you don't have to stick to the rules of React or Angular or whatever that are dictated by those corporations. If you're fine with whatever language you have, write it, compile it to JavaScript or like WebAssembly, and run it in a browser. So I think it's a huge move forward. But these corporations don't give away anything for free. I'm still waiting for their next move because they must have something in mind when they introduce WebAssembly, but I don't know right now. But I'm pretty sure something nasty will come afterwards. And I hope we will be able to survive as open source developers. Anyone else?
Thanks.
Okay, there's one other person in the back.
We said that virtual DOM is very slow and we should use DOM. But is the only thing we consider performance? Should we consider when using or choosing a framework also the structure, the architecture? For example, consider Angular dependency injection container if I want to use.
You're very right. Performance isn't the only thing. In fact, it's not even in the first 5 of things that you have to take into account. However, I use that as an example to point out how hype works. And knowing that you have alternatives like Svelte, you can use them. That is both fast and allows you to have any type of structure that you want because it's plain JavaScript. And dependency injection and other features like state management, I don't like that they are owned by these frameworks. If you want to use dependency injection, you should be able to use it anywhere you like. It's good that Angular gives you one way to do that, but it's not good that it forces you to use it to create your application because that creates vendor lock-in. Again, you cannot change that application easily. That's why it's best to have something that's very minimal and that allows you to bring your own approach and your architecture to it. It doesn't mean that for React you have to use React as simple as it is and then have to choose between 10 different Redux implementations or state management implementations. That's not productive. But I guess, you know, whatever works best for you in terms of architecture, you should be able to use that in the framework of your choice. That's why I don't really like a lot of these frameworks because it's pretty much, you know, you have to go to NPM and search for an existing plugin or a component to use it because it's hard to create your own because you don't have time for it. And that's not a good way to have to choose between all of those options. I remember I spent a lot of time choosing between different drop-down implementations in React because there are so many. And writing your own is costly and stuff. So that's also not very good. If you have too many options for something, that is a clear indication that you should stay away from that. Any framework that you should use should come with the bare minimum, the basics, that just works out of the box. That's kind of why I like Vue, because it has its own state management inside Vuex, and there are no alternatives almost. So you don't have to Google Redux versus whatever, X versus Y. You just have that thing. You use it. If you use it, if you don't, that's also fine. I think things should be this simple in order to be productive. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'll be outside for a couple of more minutes. If you like, we can continue the discussion there. Thanks again for coming today at this very late hour. Thanks.